Greetings, book lovers everywhere, and welcome back to E-Train Talks. I'm E-Train, a 12-year literacy and kindness advocate, book lover, and author interviewer. And today's guest is a very, very special one indeed. What can I tell you about him? Well, let's just say he writes lots and lots of books. In fact, I read that he's written well over 150 stories, and some websites say 314.
What?
That's not too shabby. As you can tell from my immense pile, or I guess organized pile, I have read many of his entertainingly fantabulous stories. I created the fantabulous word, it's copyrighted. And plan to read more. So, who am I talking about, you wonder? Here's a hint. He is a New York Times best-selling author and the recipient of many, many awards, like the Children's Choice Award, Georgia Children's Book Award, and, as he's from New Jersey, the New Jersey Reading Association Lifetime Achievement Award. That's a long name. And that's just to name a few. If that is not enough, he's regarded, at least in my eyes, as one of the greatest children's writers in the universe. Though, maybe not in the multiverse, we'll have to see. I'm talking about the one and only author, though you can already see from his Zoom name. It's Dan Gutman. Thank you so much for joining me today, Dan.
Oh, thanks, E-Train. Thanks for having me. Before we get started, I have to say something nice about you, which is, I deal with I shouldn't say a lot, but a number of young podcasters, interviewers, reviewers, whatever. And, for the most part, they'll put up videos that say like, "Ooh, I read this book and it's really good. I give it a 10. You should read it." Like that's the extent of their, video. But you go all out. You research the person you're talking to. You learn all about them, and you ask really great questions, and you really have your act together. And I got to hand it to you. You're doing a heck of a job, and I see good things for you in the future. That's all I want to say. Okay.
Well, thank you. And I too I'm very, very thrilled to get the chance to talk with you today. And for all of you watching who somehow don't know who Dan Gutman is, in case you didn't know, he writes many, many books. I mean, I already told you that part. But Dan's books have sold millions of copies worldwide. Just the My Weird School series, that in itself has already sold millions and millions of copies. If there happens to be someone watching who's not familiar with Dan books, I can guarantee that after this interview, you will head right to Amazon, your local bookstore, wherever you find your books, and you'll want to check out, I guess, 5, 10, 100 copies of all of his different kinds of books. And because he writes for young readers to middle graders to even young adults. And I've met a ton of kids like me who devour his stories. And the first question is about, I guess in a sense, devouring stories, because your stories are so captivating, and you try to write stories exactly like that. So kids will look up after an hour and feel like they've been watching a movie in their head. I love this and find it to be true about all the books I've read of yours, even from when I was in kindergarten and I first discovered the My Weird School Fast Fact stories. It felt like a movie. A fun documentary, if that exists. So, do you think that writing in a way that really engages readers and makes them escape into a story, do you think that's a talent or something that can be learned?
Well, first of all, I love documentaries. Okay.
I do too. I do.
Okay. All right. As far as like it being self-taught or whether it can be taught, I honestly don't know the answer to that question. But I will say that just in my case specifically, I'm self-taught.
Mm-hmm.
I never took a writing class in my life, actually. I went to college and I studied psychology. I didn't study writing, never took a writing class. And but for some reason, writing always came naturally to me, even when I was your age. I remember sitting in class in elementary school and the teacher would say, like, write an essay or about something. And I'd look around, I'd see the other kids like kind of struggling to put a sentence together. And for me, it was just like having a conversation with somebody. I could just write, and it just felt very normal, very natural. So when the time came, it became a natural career for me. I don't know if it could have been taught. If I had gone to school and learned how to write, I might not have been as adept at it as I am because they would have taught me all the rules, you know. I never learned any of the rules. I just made it up along the way. So I what I do basically is I write the way I like to read. You know, like
Yeah,
I like to read stories that like one sentence flows right into the next sentence. One paragraph flows into the next paragraph. One chapter leads into the next one. If I'm reading a book and like, you know, I read the chapter and then I come to the next chapter and it's completely a different story, my mind gets all discombobulated and I need I guess my brain is wired in a way that I prefer simplicity to complexity, you know?
yeah.
So I like simple books, simple TV shows, simple, I shouldn't say simple, I should say uncomplicated plots and stories. Songs like that too. So I think my brain is wired to like simplicity and flow. So that's the way I write. I write the same way that I'm thinking. And it's especially good, I think, for kids who are not great readers. You know,
Hmm.
maybe a lot of kids like you love to read, and you probably like complex stories as well as simple ones. But people like me and a lot of the kids out there who are reluctant readers, they prefer really simple stories, and that's what I try and write. Other
Well,
people are different. Other people are different. You know, I respect that, but that's just me.
well, you do a great job of getting all kinds of readers, as you said, really engaged in your stories because that's kind of what your writing is all about. Fun, I guess you could say simple, storylines, and fantastic plots. But with, I guess you could say, greatness, there's also rejection. Because you could not find great without sadness, I guess. Like, there's no beautiful days without rainy ones. So, at the beginning of your writing career, you were met with many obstacles and rejection letters, and I also found some on your website. But you didn't give up and you kept moving in the direction of your writing dreams.
Yeah.
What kept you moving forward?
Yeah. And by the way, I still get some rejections today. You know, it's not like it was only when I was just getting started. And, you know, I think a lot of kids see famous people and they assume those people never struggled in their lives. You know, they never really encountered obstacles. They were like overnight sensations. Well, I think especially in the arts, be it writing or music or dancing or acting, things like that, there's a lot of rejection. It's really hard to get started and it's really hard to make a living. I brought along a few of my rejection letters to show you because kids don't believe it, you know, but like, yes, here's some of my rejection letters here.
Wow.
So, like, you know, Scholastic rejected me, you know, we've all read Disney books in our time. They rejected me.
Mhm,
Do you ever read Sports Illustrated for Kids magazine?
mhm.
They rejected me. Um, Highlights reject. I've been rejected by all the big publishing companies. Simon and Schuster rejected me, and I could go on and on. Random House. Anyway, the point is that it's hard to get started, and you know, Dr. Seuss's first book, I believe, was rejected like 27 times or something like that. Harry Potter was rejected when J.K. Rowling initially wrote it. So rejection is really part of the creative arts, and you have to really develop a thick skin to get used to being rejected. Because in the beginning, you think you're a genius, and there's no reason why anybody should ever reject you. But I think it's really important, especially in the creative arts, that you have to be very persistent,
Mhm.
very driven to accomplish what you want to accomplish. There's a certain amount of confidence you have to have in your own ability. Like I convinced myself, even all after all these editors were rejecting me left and right, I just convinced myself that I kind of have my finger on the pulse of what kids would like to read. And I'm going to trust my instincts rather than just give in and say, okay, you don't like it. It must not be any good. I would just keep trying. I'd send it to another publisher. And eventually I would get my stuff published. I had one book, E-Train, that was rejected 20 times over the course of 10 years. It was a picture book called Casey Back at Bat. And eventually I found a publisher for it. And I'm really glad that I didn't quit. And I save those rejection letters so that, when I do Zooms with schools and stuff, I show them to the kids and I say, you're going to get rejected someday, and I hope when you get rejected, you're not going to give up either, because you never know what might happen if you stick with it. So that's my whole take on rejection.
Well, that, I mean, I would call rejection sad, but rejection is the very thing that kind of, I guess, in your words, without rejection, like, you also have to have, okay,
It
yeah,
builds character is what it
yeah,
does.
it builds character.
If I had been wildly successful when I was, 21 years old, I don't think I would be able to do what I do now. I think it helps to have overcome some obstacles to be successful later, I think.
Definitely. And on your website, you say that you like taking a blank page and turning it into a world, just kind of what writing is all about. And I think this is the perfect segue into my surprise guest questions. Questions. Today, for the very first time on E-Train Talks, I offer the chance for fans of stories to submit questions to ask during our talk today. And while they can't pop up on the Zoom, they did write them on a Google form. And the first is from Cruz in Northern California. And his question is, how did you get into writing books?
Mm.
So we can start off with that one.
Okay, it's kind of a long story. I hope I won't bore you with it.
That's okay.
But I was in college, okay, and I wasn't studying writing, but just for the heck of it, I decided to write a story and submit it to our college newspaper, which was a daily paper. And it was a little fake quiz called, and I have it right here because I saved it, from 1976. Okay.
Wow.
It's How Cool Are You? And it was a quiz for people to figure out how cool they were, okay, in 1976. And I didn't work on the paper or anything. I just submitted it to them. And lo and behold, they printed it. And the next day I was walking around campus and like everybody was reading my article. And that was the first time I felt like, whoa, this is cool to like write something and have people read it and get excited about it. So that didn't really create a career for me. I continued majoring in psychology, and I even went to graduate school for 2 years studying psychology until I decided that I don't want to be a psychologist. Okay. And I didn't know what to do with myself. And I started to think like, well, what do I like to do? And I always enjoyed writing letters to my friends. Writing, as I said earlier, came naturally to me. So I just decided to try writing as a profession. And in the beginning, I didn't know what I was going to do. I just felt like I had a talent for writing. So I tried writing newspaper articles, magazine articles. I tried writing screenplays. I tried writing books for adults. And nothing really was that successful to me. But I did my first book in answer to your question. Oh, you had a question, right? The question was about my first book. I was working on a video games magazine, as you know, called Video Games Player. Okay.
Ooh.
Way back before your time, E-Train, back in the 80s. Okay. And for some reason, when you're the editor of a magazine, people assume you're an expert in that field, which I was not by any means. But people assumed I knew a lot about video games and computers. So I was able to go to Simon, was it Simon & Schuster? No, it wasn't Simon & Schuster. I went to a publishing company and I said, I got a book idea about computers. And the idea was that back in the 80s, before everybody owned a computer, people didn't know what computers were for. Other than like databases and word processing, nobody knew what you could do with a computer. And there were all these kinds of cool programs out there. So I said, I'm going to do a book called I Didn't Know You Could Do That with a Computer. And this was my first book. It was 1985. And it was all about like, weird and unusual software that people could buy and run on their computers. And that was my first book I ever wrote back in 1980, back in ancient history, 1985. And after that, well, basically, I was writing about computers for a long time. I didn't know anything about computers. I was a total fraud. And it wasn't until my kids were born, my son Sam and my daughter Emma, that I decided I was like, my son was born, I was starting to read children's books with him for the first time since I was a kid. And I thought, let's try writing for kids. And as soon as I started writing for kids, I felt, this is what I'm good at. This is what I should have been doing all along. So I switched to writing for kids, and I've been doing it ever since. And by the way, my kids don't look like that anymore. Now they look like this, E-Train. That's
Wow.
my son Sam is 33 years old now, and my daughter Emma is 27. So that's how I got started.
Back in the olden days when
Back in
dinosaurs
the
were
old
still roaming
days.
the world
Yes, that's
and
true.
phones did not exist.
Yes, that's true. The internet did not exist. I started writing on a typewriter, actually.
Wow. Writing about computers and you don't even have one. How fraudulent.
That's right. Well, I was using them mostly to play games on.
Hmm.
Um,
Well,
but the beauty of the computer, I mean, you don't appreciate, like writing on a typewriter, every time you made a mistake, you had to take the paper out of the thing and start all over again. Like, it's crazy.
I could never do that. Thank you for autocorrect, computer. Well, I guess that's kind of another question. So, what games did you enjoy?
Oh, video games?
Yeah,
Honestly, you know,
or still now.
I'd like to tell you I was a big gamer, and I'd be lying if I did, because I really started the magazine not because I loved the games, but because Pac-Man became a huge sensation in 1981. Okay,
Pac-Man Fever.
Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, all those really early asteroids, all those really early video games. It was a huge phenomenon, and I thought this would be a great magazine. It would be a great subject for a magazine. So I started it for business purposes, not because I was so much into it myself. I just thought this thing would sell. It did sell a little bit, and I worked on the magazine for a few years before it did finally go out of business. And then another wave of video game popularity came on, and it's huge today, as even more than it ever was.
Wow. Well, my next question for you is a bit of I guess you could call it a funny one.
Okay.
So, your popular series, My Weird School, features quirky characters and humorous situations. And as someone who hopes to one day write stories too,
Mhm.
first, can you tell us about your creative process when coming up with all these storylines? And also, like, just to give one example, one of your My Weird School books is called Mr. Klutz's Nuts. You have such hilarious and funny titles. How do you come up
Yeah.
with them too?
Well, I'll tell you very briefly about My Weird School, and that was my daughter Emma's doing. Okay, she was in second grade, and she was reading Junie B. Jones. You ever read Junie B. Jones,
Yeah.
E-Train? Okay, Emma was reading Junie B. Jones, and I thought there should be something like Junie B. Jones told by a boy.
Hmm.
So I took a Junie B. Jones book, and I like counted the number of words, the number of pages, the number of pictures, the number of chapters, and I just kind of like decided to write my sort of take on a little obnoxious kid like that from a boy's point of view. So that's how My Weird School got started. As far as the rhyming titles go, um, I grew up reading Dr. Seuss
Mhm.
like everybody else. And, Dr. Seuss used a lot of rhyming in his books, like Yertle the Turtle, for instance. So I wanted to do rhyming titles for My Weird School. I thought it would set the series apart from every other series that was out there. So the first book was called Miss Daisy is Crazy. And by the way, you can't even use the word crazy in children's books anymore. I kind of got grandfathered into it. But anyway, I decided I wanted to do rhyming titles. So here's what I did. I made a list of words that mean crazy, like bananas and loony, for instance. And then I tried to think of words that rhyme with those words that could be somebody's name, like bananas, Hannah. Ms. Hannah is bananas. Cooney, loony. Mrs. Cooney is loony. So that's how I got the rhyming titles. At some point, I ran out of words that meant crazy. And then I had to switch to things like, Mrs. Dole is out of control, uh, Dr. Nicholas is ridiculous, Mr. Harrison is embarrassing, and the newest one, which came out recently, is Miss Banks pulls lots of pranks. And by the way, E-Train, this is the start of a new series called My Weird-tastic School.
Ooh.
And yeah, I got that name. I got that title because I didn't know what to call it. And I was doing a Zoom with a school in New Jersey one day, and I told the kids I didn't know what to call the new series. And some kid raised his hand. His name was Sam Brazzini. And he raised his hand and he said, "You should call it My Weird-tastic School." And I said, "That is great." So that's why this particular book, most of the books are dedicated to Emma, my daughter. This one is dedicated to Sam Brazzini,
Wow.
because he's the one who came up with the title of the series. So what was your question again? Oh, about the titles, the titles. Yeah, that's how I got the titles. And now there have been like 90 books in the series now, so it's really scraping the bottom of the barrel now, E-Train.
Yeah. I see all these videos on the internet, and so like these people create series and they just try to use like adjective like synonyms of like one adjective over and over and over again. And like it seems a lot like what's happening with the My Weird School series. And then like when you're done with like My Weird Tastic School, you'll probably go to like My Weirdest Tastic School, and just you're gonna keep going on and on and on.
It will be interesting to see how far the publisher wants to go with this because
That's true.
I've been doing this series for 20 years now, and
Wow.
at some point it's going to come to an end. So I don't know when that's going to happen, but when it happens, it happens. And by the way, you asked me a little bit about my creative process
Mm.
in writing the books. Um, I'm a planner. I know a lot of children's book authors or a lot of authors. They just like sit at their computer and start typing into a blank screen. Like
Yeah.
they must be geniuses. Okay. I can't write like that. I'm a planner. I've got to plan my whole story out from start to finish before I write the first word. And what I use to do that is plain old file cards.
Mm.
I just start jotting down ideas, anything that pops into my head, a piece of dialogue, a description of a character, some trivial fact, whatever it is, I write it down on one card. And once I have 100, sometimes 200 cards, I'll lay them all out on a flat surface and I'll start grouping the cards together that go together. And little by little, I'll sort of weave together a story that makes sense from start to finish. And this is my outline for the book. And I used to do it on computer, but I found on computer when the outline got too long, it didn't fit on one screen anymore.
Mm.
And it became difficult to cut and paste back and forth. So I started using the file cards instead, and they work a lot better for me. And I always tell kids, you might want to try a system like this for your writing too, because it's a really simple way to organize your information.
Well, I don't know if I could consider myself a planner or even like half of one, because I start writing out on a blank piece of, I mean, computer paper, not like actual paper, because I cannot write like in school. We had to write a historical fiction story that was like 10 pages, and
Uh-huh.
we had to like write the drafts on paper, and I can't do that, so I have to do it on the computer, and I just write it all out, and then I get completely writer's blocked within like the first 3 pages. So I guess that file card way could be extremely helpful.
Everybody gets writer's block, by the way. And I'll tell you what I do personally is I break the rhythm. I'll take a timeout. I'll go for a bike ride in the park. I'll have a bite to eat. I'll do something completely different.
Mhm.
And hopefully when I get back to my computer, my brain is working again. But I'm just going to say that like I have my system with the file cards. You've got your system. Everybody has their own system that works for them.
Mhm. Well, you talked a bit about how the My Weird School series might eventually come to a close. Do you think that if it were to, would you kind of have like a finale book, or would it just kind of be, it's like you write a typical My Weird School story and then it's kind of vanishes, it just
That
ends?
that's a great question. I'd like to think that I could end with a bang, you
Mm,
know, in some way. The way like great TV shows, The
yeah.
Sopranos, it's when TV shows come to an end, there's usually some kind of a finale. The problem is that I might not know when it's going to happen.
Mm.
I write these books. I write these books like 4 in advance. I've written the next 4 My Weird School books already that haven't come out yet. And at some point, when they tell me that it's over, I might have already written the last book. So I might not be able to give it a proper finale the way I'd like to.
My next question is about one of your more recent stories, and also kind of more, I guess you could say, maybe not as simplistic. It's Houdini and Me, which I have right here.
Oh, thank you for reading it.
It was I guess you could call it epic, but also just really mind-boggling in a sense. And
Why do you say that?
well, I mean, the plot itself is mind-boggling, but also the way that you may like because I don't know if any other author on this planet can make Harry Mancini and Harry Houdini switching places seem realistic, like it could actually happen. And
Did I pull that off?
I think you did pull that off, and you made me believe that that could actually happen. But I mean, you never know. Maybe that happened to you and you're some other Dan person named Dan in their body, and we don't even know.
Well, I'll tell you how it happened. It was really interesting because I live in New York City.
Mhm.
Okay, and I'm kind of into. I have a hobby, which is I like to collect addresses of famous people who lived in New York City, and there's been so many of them. So I was walking down the street one day, and I saw this plaque on the wall. Okay,
Mm,
I hope you can read it.
yeah.
Um, and it basically 8 blocks from where I live today was Harry Houdini's house, where he lived for over 20 years at the end of his life. And I didn't know much about him at the time. I just knew what most people know, which is that he was a very famous magician and escape artist. And that was it. And I thought, okay, let's check this guy out. And I started just reading about him, online. And maybe I got a book out of the library or something like that. And I thought, wow. And a lot of my book ideas come out of that question, what if? What if? Like, for instance, what if a kid were to invent a machine that did your homework automatically? Well, that inspired the homework machine.
Ooh.
Um, what if a kid got the chance to take one shot, okay, one foul shot, and if he sinks the shot, he wins $1 million? Well, that inspired my book, The $1 Million Shot. So
Mm.
I thought, what if a kid grew up living in Harry Houdini's house 8 blocks from me? And what if, even though Houdini died in 1926, what if the kid found a way to communicate with the spirit of Harry Houdini by text message? Okay, that was the whole one sentence elevator pitch of the book. And I just kind of took it from there. And that's what developed the story. So I got to tell you one little quick story, E Train,
Mhm.
because um, I when I took this picture of the plaque on the wall. Okay, I climbed up the steps. It's not a big apartment building. It's like a single family building. So I climb up the steps and I'm taking the picture, and suddenly the light went on behind the door, and the door opened up, and some guy came out, the guy who lives in the building, and he started yelling at me, and he said this is private property. Get off my front porch, leave me alone, and don't ever come back. And I felt terrible, I felt, okay, sorry. I slunk away. And I went home and I was talking to my wife, and she said, when the book comes out, you should give that guy a copy of the book.
Mm.
So the day the book came out, the day I got my first copy, I didn't want to confront the guy, so I put it in a plastic bag, the book, with my business card and a note apologizing for trespassing on his private property. I hung it from the doorknob and I ran away. And a half an hour later, the guy called me up on the phone. He says, "I'm so excited about your book. I'm so sorry that I yelled at you when you were on my front porch, and I'd love for you and your wife to come over and take a tour of Harry Houdini's house sometime." So we did, and it was great. A lot of the original woodworking and everything that is still there. He gave me a whole tour of the house, and now this guy who kicked me off his porch for for infringing on his private property, he's a friend of mine.
Well, when I this sometimes happens with authors, and it always shocks me every single time. So when I found out I was going to get the chance to talk with you, I
Yeah.
started looking into all the books you've written online. And I was surprised to find two more of your stories on my bookshelf. The Kid Who Ran for President, I'm pointing at the wrong book, there it is, and The Kid Who Became President.
Yes, I've got a
So,
copy too.
so at the time I'd read Judson's tale, I didn't really make the connection that you were also the storyteller behind The Kid Who Became and The Kid Who Ran for President, as well as the Fast Facts books, because this is like when I was 5 or 6, so I didn't really pay attention to who wrote the book, just the story. And of course, I love the stories.
Hmm.
So, can you can you share how you came up with the idea to write about a kid who ran and became president?
Yeah. That was one of my first attempts at fiction. Actually, that book came out in 1996.
Oh,
Actually,
wow.
yeah, long before your time. But I got the idea because um, Bob Dole was running for president back in 1995 for the 1996 elections, and um, he was an old guy, and a lot of people felt that he was too old to be president. As people are saying about President Biden today. But he was just running. Dole was just running for president. So I thought, if somebody could be too old to be president, what would be too young to be president? And I thought, a kid, of course. What an obvious idea. Somebody must have written this book already because it's so obvious. And I went to the library and I looked, because there was no internet for me to look up. I went to the library and I talked to the librarians there and I said, did anybody ever write a book about a kid running for president? And nobody ever had. So I said,
Wow.
it's a killer idea. It's a great title. I'm going to do it. And it really was my first successful book that kind of put me on the map. And it led to the sequel, The Kid Who Became President. So that's how the book came about. And I think if it hadn't been successful, I probably wouldn't be talking to you today, because I doubt that I would have continued in children's books
Wow.
unless I had a success at some point.
Mm.
And that was 1996 when the book originally came out. And I think it's been so successful because, every 4 years when there's a presidential election, it sells more copies.
Thank you, the US government and presidential election system.
Yeah,
Well,
Bob Dole did not win the election, needless to say.
yeah. Well, I mean, you're right, it is a killer idea, and I don't know how nobody wrote about that either.
Every
And
so often, I've come up with an idea that just the title alone, kind of like it's a natural. The Homework Machine was another one. Before the book came out, I told some kids at school visits that I was doing a book called The Homework Machine, and all I had to do was say the words, and kids would say, "I gotta read that book." So sometimes these ideas and the titles come naturally. Other times, you got to struggle, and you can't just sum up the whole book in a sentence like that.
well, now the homework machine really kind of came true with the ChatGPT and AI kind of stuff.
Really, I was ahead of my time, E-Train. I
Yeah.
was predicting this stuff back in the 90s.
Mhm. Elon Musk, move aside. Dan Gutman is the real champion of it. Of
Yeah, and I'm going to buy Twitter next from you as soon as I get 50 million, or was it billion? I don't know,
Billion.
whatever he paid for
Yeah.
it.
Well, you can also just get it for free by downloading it on the App Store.
I have it actually. Yeah. Follow me on Twitter at Dan Gutman Books.
Do it, everybody. And another question that I have is, I mean, you can already see just one baseball book by Dan Gutman right here, but he's written countless, and other sports as well, as he showed with the $1,000,000 shot, and also you can see on the top of the book the $1,000,000 kick. So, as I'm curious to know, because you obviously have written so many different genres. There's nonfiction, fantasy, fiction, of course, realistic fiction, all these different kinds of genres that you've written to. Is there a particular genre you enjoy writing most, and why?
Good question. There's a lot of authors who like to specialize. Their books are always about, like Andrew Clements. You probably read his books. He always would write school stories. Other people write always fantasy stories. I think I would get bored if I wrote the same kind of book all the time. So I write all different stuff. I write for little kids, like Rappy the Raptor. he's a rapping raptor who raps. It's a picture book for little kids. I write funny books like the My Weird School series, more serious stuff for kids your age, books about sports, my baseball card adventure series like Roberto and Me, stuff like that. I like to write all kinds of different stuff, and I think for me it keeps things fresh. If I had to write the same thing all the time, I would get bored. So I like to move along and always try something new that I haven't done before.
Well, I think you would lose all the fun of writing because writing is all about unique and cool ideas. And I mean, you've written over 150 books, so writing the same book kind of 150 times, that'd be beyond boring.
Yeah, and I started out writing nonfiction, and I did it for many years, and it never even occurred to me to try writing fiction for a long time. So I started out writing nonfiction, and now, 30 plus years down the line, I'm starting to do more nonfiction. You mentioned the Fast Facts
Mhm.
books. There's actually 8 of them. And basically, I took AJ and Andrea from My Weird School, and I have them argue about topics like sports, geography, science, history, animals, all kinds of stuff. And also, I love in my spare time what I love to read is biographies. I love to read about famous people, and I know biographies are very popular with kids, especially that series, the Who Was series,
Oh,
with the big heads on the covers.
yeah.
So I don't know if you know this about me or not, but I started another a biography a series of my own called "Wait, What?"
Oh, yeah, I have
Oh, you have one? Okay, that's thank you, E Train. Yeah, basically, I felt like most of the biographies for kids were kind of boring.
Mhm.
They were just very dry, like Wikipedia entries about these people's lives. So I basically did tons of research on these people, and I would ignore all the conventional boring stuff and just pluck out the like weird facts about their lives. So that's why it's called Wait, What? Albert Einstein was a dope, and Teddy Roosevelt was a moose, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg couldn't drive. She failed her driving test 5 times.
Wow.
And Amelia Earhart is on the moon because a creator is named after her. And Muhammad Ali was a chicken because when he went to the 1960 Olympics, he was so afraid of flying that he got a parachute. He bought a parachute and he wore it on the plane on the way to Rome for the
Wow.
Olympics. Anyway, I just kind of look for like weird facts about these people. And so I'm having fun writing nonfiction now, again, as well as fiction. Sorry to plug so many books, E-Train.
No, it's okay. It's definitely okay.
That's what I'm in business for.
Yeah. And to plug another one of your Wait What books, my mom ordered a copy of the Beatles Wait What book because I'm a huge Beatles fan.
Are you really? I'm a Beatle maniac. That book is a total labor of love. I can't wait for you to read it. I think it's coming out this summer sometime. It's going to be called "The Beatles Couldn't Read Music," and I found every weird fact about the Beatles. What's your favorite Beatles song and album?
That's a good question. My favorite Beatles song would probably be my mom's favorite is I Will, and
It's a
she kind of
beautiful song.
she got me into the Beatles when I was really little. She has like
Mm,
these videos of me dressing up as like Paul McCartney on the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club band album, like what he wore on
really?
that one, and I
Yeah,
was strumming a ukulele and singing what with a little help from my friends. So I
that's
think
great.
another one of my favorites is Come Together. And kind of
Beautiful.
all also they always sang me Golden Slumbers when I was a baby, so that's one of my favorites too.
I used to sing that to my son as a lullaby.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
So I
Well,
think maybe my favorite album would be the Abbey Road album, but
brilliant.
I cannot name a favorite Beatles song because there are just so many out there.
Yeah. A few years back, my wife and I did a pilgrimage to Liverpool.
Oh
Uh,
wow.
yeah, and we went to all their houses and the Cavern Club where they got started, and it was one of the best trips I ever had. And
Did you go to Strawberry Field?
with Strawberry Field too. Yes, I have a picture of myself at Strawberry Field. I'll send it to you when we're done here. But yeah, I'm a total Beatle maniac, and to this day, all these years down the line, they continue to inspire me. with their creativity, with their willingness to break the rules, and their sense of humor. So when people ask me, like, who inspired me more than anybody else, I don't name authors. I name creative people like the Beatles, Thomas Edison,
Mhm.
the Wright brothers, Steven Spielberg, people like that.
Well, I would give the Beatles, like, they're probably my favorite band of all time, so cannot wait, like, anymore to read. I mean, summer can't come soon enough because I need to read your newest Wait What book.
I think you're going to enjoy it. And by the way, before that one comes out, the next one is coming out, I think, next month, actually.
Oh,
And
really?
yeah, I don't know if you're going to be as interested in this one, E-Train, because you might not even know her name, but it's going to be about Lucille Ball. Does
I did
that
not know her name.
okay? She was a huge television comedian star in the 1950s. I Love Lucy was the TV show, which was
Oh!
successful. Yeah, and this book might not do very well because most kids your age don't know who she was, but it's a fascinating story. And it's called, you ready for this? Lucille Ball Had No Eyebrows. And it's called that because when she went to Hollywood in the 1940s, it was customary at the time for female actresses to have their eyebrows shaved off. And
Wow,
then
really?
they would draw little pencil lines in instead of eyebrows. And most people, after that happened, the eyebrows would grow back. But with Lucille Ball, her eyebrows did not grow back. So I titled the book, Lucille Ball Had No Eyebrows.
My mom showed me I Love Lucy on Hulu, and I do not really understand the humor, but because I mean, it's the 50s, and I'm a new kid on the block, I guess you could say.
It's interesting how some TV shows and books and movies and songs from a long time ago hold up, like
Mhm.
the Beatles music, for instance, and other stuff kids today just can't relate to. And I
Yeah.
can't relate very often to the stuff that's happening today. But I guess that's just part. When you're your age, between 12 and 16, like I think your brain is really ready to absorb all the culture that's around you, the TV shows, the movies, the songs, the books, and these are things that you'll remember for the rest of your life. And once you get past that stage, sometimes you don't pay as close attention anymore.
My next question for you is, can you give us a sneak peek into any upcoming projects or books you're currently working on?
I would like to do that. Yes. You're asking somebody to plug their stuff. Here I am. Okay. Well, the next My Weird School books, they come out like every 3 or 4 months or so. So My Weird School is going to continue. And the next book is coming out in June. I don't have a copy of it yet, so I can't show it to you. But I do have my original manuscript. It's going to be called Uncle Fred is a Knucklehead.
Woo!
Okay. And he's the host of a children's TV show. Okay.
Hmm.
And AJ and his friends get to be in the studio audience of the TV show. It's coming out on June 13th. The one after that is going to be called Professor Pitt is a Nitwit. Okay. And he is an art history professor. The one after that is going to be called Miss Nickel is in a Pickle. And she's going to help the kids create a garden outside, a vegetable garden outside the school. What could possibly go wrong? Also, do you know that I've been doing some graphic novels in the My Weird School series?
I
Are you
have seen them on your website.
okay? Yeah. Jim and I, the illustrator, started doing graphic novels like Mr. Corbett is in Orbit, where the kids take a tour of NASA and accidentally launch themselves into space. Okay,
Uh-oh.
it's full color. And the second one, which these two already came out, Get a Grip, We're on a Trip. They go to an amusement park, like a Disney World kind of place. And the next one is coming out this summer. I'm very excited. Hang on a second. Where did I put my cell phone? Because I have the cover of it on the cell phone.
I can look it up on your website maybe if it's there.
Oh, wait, but how could I not have my cell phone right here?
Is it Dorks in New York?
Yes, how did you know?
It's on the front cover of your website. I just
Oh, thank
looked
you.
it up.
Yes. They're coming to New York City. Oh, here, it's right in front of me. Here, I'll show people the cover. They're coming to New York City,
Ooh.
my hometown. So that'll be coming out. So that's the My Weird School series. There's the two Wait What books you mentioned that we mentioned, Lucille Ball and the Beatles, will be coming out. And the other big project I have, which I think you're going to enjoy because it's just for kids your age. This one's definitely not going to sell E-Train because I'm the only one who cares about this particular subject. But in Central Park, I live across the street from Central Park in New York City, and there's a large. Do you know what an obelisk is?
Yeah.
There's a large obelisk in Central Park called Cleopatra's Needle, and it was carved 3,500 years ago in Egypt, ancient Egypt. And in 1880, it was brought across the Atlantic Ocean to New York City and stood up in Central Park. And it was a tremendous effort in a day when the automobile hadn't been even invented yet. It was just a huge thing. There's one man who is very much responsible for making this all happen. And I have written a book about Cleopatra's Needle and the epic journey it took from Alexandria, Egypt to New York City. And I believe it's going to be called The Mostly True Story of Cleopatra's Needle. And that'll be coming out next year.
That is very, very exciting. And I'm just curious, did the US steal that or was that a gift?
That's a great question and a very natural question. And the answer is it was a gift.
Okay.
Yes. Certainly, we took the United States and the Western world took a lot of treasures and antiquities from the Middle East and put them in our museums. But Cleopatra's Needle was a gift of the Egyptian government to our government. And they also had an obelisk that was given to London and one that was given to Paris. So there are three great cities in the world, each have one of these ancient Egyptian obelisks.
That is very, very cool. And
Yeah.
I cannot wait to read it.
What I did was I told the story through the eyes of 5 different kids, and written in diary form. One, a kid who was an enslaved child who helped carve the thing in the first place. Another kid who created the hieroglyphics that are written on the side of it. Another kid who stowed away on a boat to bring it across the Atlantic Ocean. And another kid in New York City who witnessed the raising of it in Central Park. So I told it through 5 kids' eyes in different personalities and things like that. And I've had it's really a challenging and exciting project. And again, I don't know that it's going to find a mass audience like My Weird School has, but it's kind of a labor of love on my part. So that's why I'm doing it.
I have to ask, Dan, the final question of the interview, the question I ask every person I've ever interviewed. If you could be or if you could meet any literary character, it could be your favorite author or your favorite character in a book who could be like a famous person or just a fictional character. So who would it be and why?
You know, I knew you were going to ask that question. And it was the hardest of all your questions to answer. Because I'll tell you, I was not a huge reader like you are when I was a kid. I didn't like to read. I thought reading was boring and hard to do.
Yeah.
And my mother was worried about me, you know, and she used to buy me comic books, hoping it would get me interested in reading. And it didn't really work. And it wasn't until I was in like 5th grade or so that I became a big sports fan. And suddenly I wanted to know everything about sports. So I started reading sports books, you know. So that's what got me into reading. So as far as a literary character goes, I don't really have one. But I would say, as I mentioned earlier, I always admired creative people. And if I had the chance to, you know, have a meal with anybody in history, you know, it would be one of my heroes growing up. Like, I grew up in New Jersey, a couple of miles from Thomas Edison's laboratory in West Orange. So I think it would be way cool to meet him. And in fact, I once wrote a book about him. Whoops, there goes my stuff. Called The Edison Mystery Back in Time. This was wasn't a very successful book, but I wrote about Edison. I also wrote about the Wright brothers, who were my also heroes of mine. And if I could have dinner with the Wright brothers, that would be so awesome. I did a book called Race for the Sky about the Wright brothers. I mentioned Picasso. Be great to have dinner with him. Spielberg. But if I could have dinner with anybody or a meal with anybody in the world, it would be one of the Beatles. Okay, it would
Which one?
probably be Paul.
Mhm.
Okay, like he'd ever have dinner with me. But I would love to talk to him. I would probably tremble in his presence. You know,
I
so
would too.
that's who I would pick. Did you ever ask yourself the same question?
I've never asked myself the same question, though if we're talking about creative people, I think meeting Paul McCartney would definitely be on my bucket list and having, like, a dinner or maybe a short 20-minute lunch break with him.
Well, the
Though
next time I sit down with Paul, I'll tell him, and maybe you two could get together.
yeah, we're all, like Paul and I, like, we're pretty close. I mean, I've listened to his music. He's never recognized me or noticed I exist in my entire life. Pretty close.
Maybe he does, but he just hasn't really,
Maybe
come out.
he's the scared one.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, think of it like that.
Maybe he's one of these people who like lurks online and go and looks at your podcast all the time, but doesn't make any comments. You know?
Oh, yeah. I'd like to think of it like that.
Yeah, let's think of it that way.
Yeah. So maybe it like for a literary character or an author, I guess maybe an author, somebody like you. I mean, not just saying that because you're on the podcast. I'm just saying that because I mean, just from this interview, I've taken away you're a pretty funny, but also like a really creative guy who would like because there's some authors that we might probably like it'd be so awkward and nobody would say anything. But you don't seem that kind of like maybe not like a social person, but somebody who could start a conversation about like really anything.
Honestly, I always related better to kids than grown-ups.
I
Grown-ups like well, they talk about the weather and they talk about their lawns and stuff like
Mm.
that. Who cares? You know,
Yeah.
I find kids much more relatable. And now, when I do school visits, I do them all virtually, but I used to do them all in person. And my favorite part of the day was just at lunchtime, they'd get us a pizza. And I'd sit in the library or whatever with like 5 kids and just sit around the table and just talk about stuff, and I would learn how they talk, how they think, what they wear, what they care about. And I kind of miss those days actually. That was before COVID.
Well, it also might kind of be a way of researching your next book because you're with all these kids and you write for kids and about kids.
Oh yeah, a lot of ideas came directly out of those lunches. Like I was at lunch one day, and I said to these kids, I said, "What's the weirdest thing that ever happened in your school?" And the kid said, "Well, last week the dentist was here." And
Mm,
I said, "What? You had a dentist come to your school?" And they said, "Yeah, like once a year the dentist comes and he talks about dental hygiene." And I thought, if that's not a My Weird School book, I don't know what is. So then I wrote Dr. Floss is the Boss about this dentist who comes to school. So these kids have given me lots of ideas over the years, and I don't know what I would do without them.
go kids.
Yeah.
Well, one more question. So you mentioned that you love sports. So what's your favorite, I guess, professional sport? Like, and what's your favorite team? Like, I guess out of all sports.
You want to take a guess, or you want me to just tell you?
Well, if you're from New York or New Jersey, then
Mm-hmm.
maybe for hockey, it'd be the New Jersey Devils.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
For football,
Yeah.
maybe the Jets or the Giants.
Okay.
Maybe even the Bills.
What about baseball?
Baseball, it's a good question. I think that maybe the Yankees? But I mean, you don't really seem like the kind of person who'd like the Yankees.
And why do you say that?
Well, Yankees fans, I don't know, there's just something about them that really irritates me, maybe.
Me too. I totally agree. Hang on, E-Train. I'm a Mets fan all the way.
I
Okay.
knew it. I knew it.
I've been a
Oh,
Mets
wow.
fan since I was younger than you, actually. And baseball is my favorite sport. My wife got me this as a birthday present one year. Um, Baseball is my favorite game. I follow all the other sports very very casually, and baseball is the only one that I'm really into, and that's why I've written so many books about baseball.
So, would your favorite Met be like? I mean, currently, the be like Pete Alonso or?
He's great. I guess I don't really have a favorite player.
Mhm.
I think, actually my knowledge of the game is more deep for old time baseball than it is
Mhm.
for the current game. Although I love the changes they've made. I think
I
that
do too.
it really helps the game. But my mind is more tuned to old time baseball, and that's what really inspired my baseball card adventure series. So people like Ruth and Willie Mays and Jackie Robinson and people like that are the ones I know more about even than today's baseball.
Well, you did mention on your social medias that it was Willie Mays' 92nd birthday yesterday. So,
Yes.
and of course, that's a perfect time to plug Willie Mays and me, Willie and me.
Actually, he's the only player in that series that I ever wrote about who was still alive.
Oh, really?
For the rest of them, I pretty much felt like I don't want to get sued. Okay, so I'm just going to write about dead guys who can't sue me. But I couldn't resist with Willie and me, and so far Willie hasn't sued me yet.
That's
He,
good.
he's still kicking. Good for him. He was
Yeah.
a great player and a great man,
Mhm.
and it's nice to see he's still out there.
Definitely. And as a bit, I'm kind of split between a Giants fan and a Mariners fan, just because my dad is from Seattle and Washington State, and I pretty
Hmm.
much like all the sports teams that he likes.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm also the Giants because like some of my family was like they're very. I mean, I wouldn't say that we're all the biggest baseball fans. Maybe like more basketball or football, but I
Hmm.
do think I'm kind of a split between the two.
Do you play any sports yourself?
I play basketball, but I haven't really been in a I'm gonna be in a league in the summer, but I haven't necessarily done it, like, as I guess the word is on the tip of my competitively.
Right. Yeah. I played little league baseball when I was your age
Mhm.
for just one season, and I wasn't good. I couldn't hit the ball. I don't know. I was good at good at fielding. I was good at throwing. I was good at running. I couldn't hit the ball. But now I'm obsessed with pickleball.
Oh,
It's really fun.
it does look fun. My dad is not the biggest fan, though.
No, why not?
Well, I'm not sure, maybe it was watching Andre Agassi on TV, like, during the pickleball tournaments, like, on ESPN, like, him being so winded. He also I don't know.
I
That's a
heard about
question
that.
for another day.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I wanna watch that. I heard about that, but I didn't see it. Actually, just the other day, I was going for a pickle I hit my head against a
Oh.
wall, E-Train, playing pickleball, and, like, everybody stopped. Everybody around stopped, and a hush fell over the whole area because, like, it's the old guy who just took a fall, and, like, they figure, like, better should we call 911? Should we get an ambulance over here?" I was fine, but I get a little bit too into it?
Yeah. I can feel the same way sometimes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Dan. It has been such an honor to talk to one of my all-time favorite authors, a master of storytelling. And you wrote some of my first favorite reads, the books that I really love. I had a bit of a reading lull at one point, but then I only read nonfiction for a couple years. And
Yeah.
like it was Who Was books, but then I discovered the My Weird School, and they're funny stories, but they're also nonfiction. Like they tackle interesting like topics that I had found and still do really interesting, but they also added like a funny spin to it. So
Yeah.
those are
I
like
was gonna say that I didn't get into this field to, like, save the world or anything?
yeah.
Uh, but you wouldn't believe the emails I get from parents and teachers and librarians telling me, my son, my daughter, my student wouldn't pick up a book, and then they picked up My Weird School or one of my other books, and now all they wanna do is read. And it makes me feel so good to just have written some silly words on a piece of paper that can have such a positive impact on a kid's life. And so I'm really glad I got into this field, and it's very rewarding. And I just did it because I had a knack for it. But it's nice to know that there's so many kids out there who develop the love of reading by reading my books.
That must be the best feeling in the world, having an email
It's
from a parent and like you kind of changed a kid's life today
Yeah,
just thanks to your writing words on a page.
it's a really good feeling. Yeah.
Well, all of you, if this interview hasn't convinced you to check out one of Dan's or all of Dan's books, It's not 314. That website was wrong, so don't feel too afraid. It
Actually,
is
it's
still
175 E-Train.
That's still quite a bit, but it's not as much of a mountain to climb. And as you can all follow Dan in his social media pages, as well as you checking him out on his website, www.dangutman.com. That's where you can find him. In fact, I'll share the screen right now and share what his amazing website looks like.
Oh, thanks.
If it will work.
And while you're doing that, I'll just say thank you to all the kids out there who are watching this, who've read my books, and all their parents and teachers and librarians who've shared my books with their kids. It really means a lot to me, and thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Dan, and here it is, everybody. This is what you'll discover when you check out Dan's website. There it is. A funny picture.
There it
is. There he is. There's the cover of Dorks in New York. These are autographed. This is where you can get autographed books. There's a My Weird School board game, which I got for my birthday one year, and all these different places where you can learn more about Dan. So, what are you waiting for? Go check it out and check out all of Dan's books. You will not regret it, everyone.